All right, it's 9 a.m., so I'm going to get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining our Remake June community call, which will be about the future of fashion. I have some very, very important guests on the phone today who will get a proper introduction, but just to name everyone, we have Whitney Bach, our moderator for the panel today. We have Aisha Barenblatt, our fearless founder and CEO of Remake. We have Mara Hoffman, founder of her namesake label, and we have Whitney McGuire, who's also the founder of multiple businesses, and you'll get to hear more about her. So thank you everyone for being here. If you don't know what Remake is, we are a consumer advocacy group that believes fashion can be a force for good. And we are here to highlight the voices of garment makers around the world, to hear their stories, to understand the work that they do and how our behavior and our consumption affects them, and how we can use our behavior in a positive way to make positive changes in the fashion industry. We're really excited you're here. These community calls are something that we've opened up during the COVID pandemic to be more public. It's something that is normally just for our ambassador community, which is a global community in over 20 countries of women and men, and anyone that's passionate about fashion and wants to learn more and make a difference, they're all joining our movement. So it's incredibly inclusive, and we invite you to encourage people to join and learn more about us. I'll give you some information at the end. This is a heavy time right now, and it's important to address that the current unrest in our country has many parallels to the inequity in fashion and in the apparel industry. In both cases, the entire system is not working for many, but rather set up to bolster very few. And the current problems are exacerbated by these inequities and injustice. And there are strong connections to how our political economy and the fashion industry gain wealth and power. And that is on the backs of brown and black bodies, predominantly women in the case of the apparel industry. And these people, these humans, have been abandoned globally during this pandemic. And it's something that needs to be addressed. It's something we're going to talk about today. And I look forward to hearing the voices of these incredibly powerful and brave women who are leading this movement. So thank you all for joining us. Real quick, I want to recap our May call that we had last month, in which we spoke with Nazma, the founder of Awaj Foundation in Bangladesh. She shined a light on the current issues in Bangladesh with workers, not receiving payment and having factories closed due to the COVID pandemic. And it's why we started the Pay Up campaign to ensure that brands are held accountable for orders that they've placed. And in doing so, using our voices, using your voices as the ambassador community, adding your hashtags, donating to the campaign, signing petitions, has unlocked more than $600 million in Bangladesh alone, and $7.5 billion globally in unpaid orders, with 15 very large brands paying up. So that's a success, and it highlights the importance of attending these calls and understanding how you can use your voice and your impact to make a difference. I'm going to hand the mic over to Whitney Bach for our panel. She's going to introduce you to our guest. Towards the end, we're going to save some space for Q&A. So again, please put those in the chat so that we can monitor those and address as many as possible. And then we'll do a quick close off with some information and resources about how you can get involved so that you don't feel hopeless and that you understand how you can use your voice to make a difference. So Whitney, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm Whitney Bach. I'm a senior sustainability editor and reporter at fashionista.com, which is a fashion news website. So a lot of my work focuses on sustainability and ethics in fashion. And I'm really grateful for all of the panelists showing up today. These are all women that I've been learning from for a number of years and have learned a lot from. So I'm excited to hear what they share about sort of how they're thinking about the future post-COVID or moving forward. So first of all is Aisha Berenblatt, who I think a lot of you probably know if you're part of this community. She founded Remake and has been working in this space for a long time. We have Mara Hoffman, who founded her own eponymous brand, Mara Hoffman, as you heard, and a lot of the work that she's been doing in her brand is also known sort of for their sustainability and ethics. And then we have Whitney McGuire, who does so many things in the fashion space. She's known largely for Sustainable Brooklyn, which she co-founded. And she's also co-founder of a record label called Swimmer's Ear with her partner. So I'm really excited to hear from all of these people today. We're gonna open it up by just talking about sort of broadly, what do we think fashion is going to look like with sort of excess inventory and decreased sales projections throughout the year? What is fashion going to look like post-COVID-19, and what's going to happen to sort of the sustainability conversation? Is that going to move into a like more prominent place, or is that going to take a back seat? I'd love to hear from any of you on that.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to dive in, I think the fashion industry is not going to be the same. And in the short term, especially as we've been looking at sales projections and knowing how much the industry is sitting on surplus inventory, that the forecast for the summer and as we walk into the fall looks quite difficult. But, eternal optimist that I am, I wouldn't be doing this work some 15 years later if I wasn't optimistic. I really do think of this as a reset moment. The fragility of fashion supply chains and how this industry completely operates on debt, essentially putting down the risk onto brands. The retailers push it onto brands, onward from the brands to the manufacturers, and at the end it's the workers who power this industry that are really bearing this risk. And we've seen that, as you've alluded to, Whitney, with so many of the cancellation of orders from our sustainable fashion brand friends. We've heard of how many wholesale orders have been canceled that have already been produced. We know that online sales are just a fraction of what it used to be, and the communities that we spend our time in day out are talking a lot about, just increasingly becoming food insecure, housing insecure, protesting on the streets, the parallels for what we've seen in our country here over the weekend versus what we've been talking about since March and April in Bangladesh and the streets of Haiti and Pakistan, which is where I'm from, is to say, workers, for the work that they've already done in March and April, we're now walking into June. And as Rebecca shared, our collective solidarity has unlocked some orders. But what we've seen in terms of the future of fashion is we cannot operate in this way where we are constantly extracting natural resources. We're constantly extracting from the communities that make our clothes and not putting much back. And so I almost think that sustainability is an overused term. People don't even at this point know or trust what it means. And I would counter that we need to be thinking about resilience. And when we think about resilient supply chains, it is about putting the worker communities front and center. It's about, I hope to see more ability for collaboration between manufacturers so that they're able to share and push back on brands given how they have behaved in this pandemic. I also think we need an overhaul of financial payment structures. An ability to assure that they are backed by banks so that you can't just walk away from orders that have already been produced. Two other things that we think about a lot and we can get into is, we need more research and development and tech integration. This industry in many ways, particularly on the production side, hasn't changed the way it operates from the 50s, poor production planning, bad forecasting. And in the end, I think for our consumer community, this really has been a movement to take stock of what we already own and to be buying less and better. So some big thoughts there, but hopefully we can get into some of that. But I'd love to hear from the other Whitney and Mara.
Thank you, Aisha. I think when we think about this question about what the fashion industry will look like post-COVID-19, like we're already living post-COVID-19. The event has already occurred. So I think to start to answer that question, we really have to look at what's happening now in fashion. And I honestly think it's going to continue to look like a dumpster fire until stakeholders along the fashion supply chain, the global fashion supply chain, center, like you said, communities. These communities that support their infrastructure, like their integral, efficacy, and the needs of marginalized communities in their profit models. And I also think that designers need to reevaluate their target customers and design for customers who they envision fighting for a better world. Like, if your target customer isn't someone you can see fighting for a better world, then you should just shut your shit down right now. And in terms of your question about whether sustainability can take a back seat, Whitney, for me, sustainability could never take a back seat because I'm a Black woman in America, right? My sustainability is threatened every single day. So sustainability is the car, it's driving the car. It's always in the front seat. What's happening right now, this COVID-19 pandemic, it's absolutely a sustainability issue. And garment workers starving because big brands are deciding that the lives of these people who make their products are not valuable enough to sustain within their ability. These are all issues that are correlated. These are connected, and these brands need to make their products. They need to have the money to pay for their orders. They already do have the money to pay for their orders. They're choosing not to. This choice, to me, is just, it's violence, and this choice threatens the sustainability of human beings all along the supply chain. So fashion can't continue the way it has been, the way it was. Sort of the foundation of fashion is based on extractability and of resources and people. It can't continue this way, and we're seeing this colossal sort of crumbling, or as Mara called it in a conversation we had before, a contraction of this industry. We're going to have to continue to reevaluate our relationship to fashion and unlearn all of the colonial conditioning that we've been exposed to within this industry. That's all.
Yeah, Mara, I wanted to ask you too, since you're running a clothing business right now, how has your business been evolving in response to this? And especially with wholesale orders, I know that's been a decent part of what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. I first want to recognize that it's a very hard time right now to even be having a conversation around fashion and inventory, and that we just recognize my own discomfort in what can feel like, even within my business, a sense of frivolity in respect to what is happening in the world right now. That being said, going off of what Whitney was just speaking about, that we have been in an accelerated contraction. I think that we've discussed that quite a bit as a company, that it's in these kind of series of contractions that we begin to rebuild things and re-examine and restructure. But this one has been fast and furious, and I run an independent fashion brand that has always somewhat been like the little engine that could. And so for something like this, it's like the positive aspect of it is it brought all of the discomforts that we were feeling for years that weren't, that were, even after we made the shift towards sustainability, like we were still in discomfort. We were still recognizing all the things that weren't fixed or even close to it. And so this just sort of like dropped it on the front porch. And it was like now, like just getting completely kicked off to examine all of its brokenness. So more specifically, when wholesalers canceled, it affected my business immediately and directly. And for us, when you affect our employees or you affect our supply chain, that messes with our sustainability. So everything has been shaken. So wholesalers, a lot of our wholesalers canceled. We saw an immediate decline in our direct to consumer business. And my company has had to like contract and fit this new shape almost on a daily basis. And it's been, I'm not gonna lie, it's been brutal. This company is 20 years right now, and I have had to reduce my staff by almost 50%. And these are people that have devoted extraordinary amounts of love and talent and focus and creativity to this mission. And as somebody who believes in it so deeply, and to actually know that the human beings that are so close to you, that you can't hold everyone anymore, is it's a horrific thing. But I do come from a positive aspect that, you know, without immense amounts of discomfort, we stay complicit and we don't change. So even for my brand, I welcome enormous amounts of discomfort, because I know that there's still so much more to do. Like, we have not figured it out. Like, no brand has figured out sustainability. Like, and I have not. So we are, you know, we're in the discomfort for the beginning of something that I hope can be better.
Aisha, could you talk a little bit more about what's next for the Pay Up campaign, sort of this summer and going into the fall?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Rebecca had alluded to this, and just how heartened we had been with the global solidarity of Pay Up campaign. You know, I was looking this morning, and there's some 50,500 signatures on the petition itself. And I think for people listening, it's really important to know how that simple act of having signed the petition has made such a huge difference. Because, you know, when we started in March, we had one brand that was agreeing to pay up. At this point, we have 15. And so part of the work that has been, at least that'll continue till June, is that time is really of the essence, right? We're not asking for charity. This is about simply honoring contracts for March and April, particularly knowing that the summer and fall forecast is starting to look very grim. And so, you know, none of our supplier partners are reporting that they have orders off the same volume as before. You know, even as some countries start to open up in a social distanced way, their retail stores, it's not going to be the same. And so what we know is that time is of the essence. There has been some movement behind the scenes with some of the brands paying for some off, but not all of their orders. And so we really look at the next 3 weeks as being very critical in making some of that happen, because the money needs to get to workers' hands, not today, but yesterday. Because what we are hearing, you know, as many of you may know, a lot of workers migrate from rural areas to urban centers. A lot of them are unable to make rent. There's been a lot of protesting on the streets, and just simply asking for back pay. So over the next 3 weeks, it's just going to be, you know, the list of brands that haven't paid up is longer than the ones that have. And if you're interested in who, you know, on our website, remake.world, we have a tracker, and we're updating that on a weekly basis. I think the other thing that we're really going to pivot and focus on is calling upon international institutions and local governments to be thinking about safety nets. You know, as of this month, all factories have been opened for business. So not just to make protective gear, but to be making our t-shirts, tops, bottoms. And one of the things we are very worried about is that infection rates in many of the parts of the world where our clothes come from continue to rage, be it Haiti, be it Cambodia, be it Bangladesh. And that by opening up factories, which really the brands have asked the factories to open, because, you know, the product that was made for the spring, and now we're looking for more seasonal summer garments, is, well, what's to happen when a lot of these people get sick? Because the infrastructure is not there. The hospitals are not going to be able to absorb the workers. And, you know, the ability to socially distance in a lot of these communities is very difficult. So next steps for us is really going to be focused on sick pay, and also assuring that some public institution money is trickling in.
Whitney, you've done such a great job on social media, on Instagram specifically, sort of envisioning futures for us and for society, whether that's talking about race and the way that that conversation is exploding in the US right now, or other things. I would love to hear, how are you envisioning sort of the future of fashion moving forward?
Yes, envisioning, imagining is a superpower. It takes audacity because, like systemically, my imagination is sort of like a threat, but it's also the way that I survive. So, yeah, I'm constantly imagining the future. I see in the future, like, for the fashion industry, a baseline definition of sustainability that's rooted in Afro-Indigenous wisdom and credited as such. I see public apologies being issued to descendants of enslaved Africans from state, local, and federal governments and private corporations whose success is owed to white privilege. And I see these apologies for Indigenous communities on the lands we occupy. I see reparations in various forms, financially or otherwise. The support of autonomous Black and Brown-led brands, initiatives, organizations within fashion and beyond, and the inclusion of our voices at existing tables with safety and support, and the true end of the appropriation of our cultures and our cultural capital, respecting our spaces. I see spirituality becoming a focal point in terms of the expression of what we wear, because our hearts during this time hopefully are expanding. And I see white people getting used to being uncomfortable and hopefully therefore becoming more helpful in the fight to protect these communities that we're speaking of, and the community and Black lives here in the US. I see major fashion houses whose legacies are built on the extraction of people and planet for generations, completely experiencing financial ruin. I see the disbursement of egregious wealth to communities that are in need. Wholly protected, liberated future is what I see. Yeah.
Damn. Just want to sit with that for a second. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Want to ask all of you, what do you see? There's all of these sort of different people and different roles that different people are sort of playing in this ecosystem around sustainable fashion. Wanted to ask you all, what do you think the role is for fashion designers, for manufacturers, for governments and policymakers, and for just citizens, customers, shoppers? What do you think needs to happen on all those different levels? Anyone can jump in on this one.
I'll just offer quickly. I think for the everyday shoppers, what has been, what we've seen from the Pay Up campaign, what we've seen just from the power of using our voices collectively for specific causes, like that does work. Like that does put pressure, and that does eventually create change. So I think that we, as everyday consumers already have, this ability and this role, within this role, we have a lot of power to change the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Whitney said. We spend our time day in, day out with our community. And I know that within Remake, we're really craving for fashion to be more than just these rapid obsolescence clothes that are, plundering our natural resources, plundering women around the world. And then for what purpose? They end up in landfills anyway. And so this notion of experience and our values being tied to the fashion industry, wanting to buy less and better. What is our value system and how do our clothes reflect that is something that's been very top of mind for our community. I also really dream of a renaissance when it comes to the labor movement, and we've certainly seen this. And I think it's important to be thinking about workers across the value chain of the fashion supply chain. Historically, brands have really pitted workers against one another, where it's to say, well, we're paying our retail staff, So this is really about a North American or European conversation. The local governments should worry about the Bangladeshi workers. But here we've really seen solidarity where it's like, no, 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 whether I'm an Amazon worker getting sick as I'm shipping warehouse distribution, whether I'm thinking about these issues as a garment maker or a retail worker, we're actually all in this fight together. And so that sort of solidarity up and down the supply chain is something that we're already starting to see. There's certainly been a lot of crackdown and pushback, but if I were to dream, as Whitney is allowing us, that renaissance of labor movement is really something that we're hoping, and for it to really be women powered, because historically even the unions haven't really represented a lot of the advocates and women's voices that are so strong and powerful that we come across in our community visits and such. I think the other thing that's been heartening is also seeing more call for regulation. We've always allowed the fashion industry to regulate itself. And here we are 30 years later without that much progress. And it's like, well, that's interesting. If you're going to have this deregulated, the growth will trickle down. We know that that's not working. It's not working in fashion. It's not working in other industries as well. And right here in California, we've seen a few bright spots. SB 1399 did pass in the House. That's to assure that piece rate is not how workers right here in LA are paid, but instead that brands are paying the minimum wage. I've seen that both the House of Representatives and the Senate did pass the bill around holding brands accountable for not using the Uyghur concentration camps when it comes to cotton supply. That bill is now going to be sitting at President Trump's desk. And so I really do hope that we see more regulation when it comes to transparency and traceability as well.
Mara, what are you specifically hoping for fashion brands and designers, and for your brand in particular, to do?
Well, first of all, thank you, Whitney and Aisha, that you set it forth. As far as what we're trying to do right now is dig into all the pain points that have been there based on our pace, our scale as an industry, circularity, and how to actually really establish that with the work that we're doing. I think it continually comes back to examining our purpose, asking the question over and over, like, what are we doing here? And if we are here and taking up any space, what are we actually of service to, and what are we helping? And I think that that's a continual one that's coming up in such a deep way right now, and forcing a re-examination on, on a spiritual level and on a business level. Or I guess those two aren't separate for me, of what am I doing through this human experience, and what am I helping, and what am I actually harming, and what does it mean to be a leader right now? And I question quite a bit, especially during these past few months, of what is leadership. And sometimes, what has come up for me just in the train of thought is leadership going away? Is it like, is your job as a leader to go, does that leadership go away? And I think in some ways it is. And I really wrestle with that as a brand, as a company that is ultimately continuing, or has up until this point manufactured quite a bit. And so what is the next role of leadership? So for us right now, it is digging extraordinarily deep into our current resources and liabilities, and putting all future manufacturing on hold. So, and some of that has been forced upon us, but with now levels of gratitude and understanding for that, that forced pause, and being able to stop a future collection from being made is, after all of these years, is pretty powerful. And then what comes after that? So for us, we're pushing with many other people in this industry and designers to reevaluate our calendar, which we're on, reevaluate the insatiable monster that we are all feeding, and have gotten so wrapped up in feeding that, like, we can't see up from down. And I think we talk about quite a bit this idea of reestablishing relationship to all material things. And I do that on a personal level very deeply, but then standing behind a business that is also telling specifically women, to go out and continue to buy things, you know, to fill whatever void that is. Like, there's conflict in that. So I think we have to examine our relationship to all things right now, and clothing is a huge one, especially when we think about women and their own, you know, women as a whole and their healing, and what are we doing as brands? Are we hindering that, or are we helping that? So I think it's just examining and not getting comfortable when you hit any level of plateau or think you've figured something out, because you haven't. Like, there's just something else to be, you know, unfolded next. So don't get comfortable. Like right now, like, don't even reach for comfort is what I'm saying. Like, forget it. Don't try and distract yourself with it, because now is the time to be so incredibly uncomfortable that, like, you do change or die. And when I say die, I mean get out.
I so appreciate your candor and honesty, Mara, because it's something that we within Remake often puzzle through, this notion that growth and unchecked growth are essentially in conflict with sustainability. And you know, when you are particularly a public company and you've got shareholders and investors, but we hear this even from some of our smaller private labeled companies, is to say, well, the more ill-disciplined the supply chain gets, the more product we're putting out there, it's very hard to keep up with the original founding sustainability ethos. And so, you know, what is the future of fashion if it's not about all of these seasons and constantly putting out more product? You know, what is that experiential experience that keeps you profitable and yet sustainable? You know, is it about the rental vintage market? Is it about, you know, product that lasts forever? And I would reckon that for a lot of the bigger brands, trying to retrofit this is quite impossible. You know, we don't talk about this enough, that if you're in the business of constant growth, you actually cannot be a sustainable company. Like, it doesn't work.
No. Yeah, re-examining our ideas of success. And I come back to sort of like the yin and the yang on that, and this like masculine approach of what success and growth meant. And it was continually in this external space of more and more, where like feminine leadership comes from like intentional and emotional and compassionate spaces that doesn't need this like this continual filling, you know, it sits in a space of being with much more grace. And so it's time for the examination.
And, you know, here's to more female leadership as well. It's something I talk about a lot, that here's the $2.5 trillion industry that's essentially built on the backs of women, right? Whether model to garment maker, you think about everyone in your graduating class at Parsons. And yet when you think about who controls the industry, there's, you know, 4 or 5 billionaires who all happen to be white men. So I do think we have to be thinking about this distribution and equity, and how much an industry that, you know, it's the women's wear line that it keeps it buoyant and profitable, that we should really be thinking about what is female-centric leadership in the fashion industry mean, and how can we really come into that power.
I feel really struck listening to this too. I don't want to speak for you, Aisha, because I don't know as much about this part of your life, but I know for both Whitney and for Mara and for myself that there's a spirituality that's informing a lot of how we do things, and it's different for each of us, and it's coming from different sort of faith backgrounds or spiritual backgrounds. But I know that that's something that like really informs this, and I'm struck by that too, and sort of the lack of fear on the part of these women of like talking about that. And I don't know, that's not something you see everywhere. Like, even if that's a part of people's lives, it's not something people always talk about. So I really want to like call that out and appreciate that too. Sort of the willingness to connect all these dots and see how interconnected our sort of worldviews are with how we see sustainability, with how we see race, with how we, it's being able to make those connections, I think is also something really special to hold on to, and that I'm like seeing modeled here. So I really appreciate that. I do want to steer back to this question about sort of the regulatory system and how we're looking at that. Whitney, do you have any insight on sort of like from your legal background on what that could look like? Could we ever have enforceable contracts between sort of buyers and suppliers that prevents things like what this pay up campaign has been trying to address in the future?
Okay, I'm going to get in my lawyer bag and say it depends. But I will say that enforceable contracts contracts by nature are really like these agreements within this fashion industry are privatized. So it's like who is enforcing these contracts? And usually when contracts are breached, they're, usually adjudicated in a court of law if they're not mediated. And then when international contracts are at play, there's a multiplicity of factors that are present that sort of diminish the enforceability of these agreements, which we've seen evidence of with, wholesalers, completely not paying their orders. And we also see this in sort of the way these ineffective audit processes have sort of been rolled out over the past few years since Rana Plaza. They're not working, and they're often racist and coming from a completely non-accountable standpoint. So when there's there's an imbalance there. We have an imbalance in bargaining power with larger big box brands and factories and even municipalities. So if these contracts, like on paper, they look great. But as we can see, the legal sort of effect of them is that it really, the enforceability is discretionary. And so I don't really see the legal or regulatory aspect changing anytime soon, but I do see, like I said, the power of everyday consumers putting pressure on brands to adhere to their contracts, or advocating for more stringent policy changes within municipalities, attaching these contracts to, like Aisha said at the beginning, like bank notes, so that these brands can't just up and vacate their responsibilities. So yeah, I mean, if we really want to get involved legally, just right where we are, we can support Remake. We can help organizations that are on the ground supporting garment workers, help them, provide information to these garment workers about their rights, and support organizations that are supporting their safety. Brands are going to have to realize that they have this like apolitical responsibility to compensate people who are providing, their revenue stream, basically their product for their revenue stream. So, until that happens, I don't really see the legal regulatory aspect of this changing anytime soon.
I'm a little more hopeful than you are, Whitney, because, the thing is, for most of the fashion industry, and we're talking the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, what's mind-boggling to me is that the entire industry operates on purchase orders. Purchase orders are not contracts. They're not enforceable in any way. And so, brands have very stringent quality control measures and thinking about intellectual property. But when it comes to the actual supplier payments, it's always operated on debt. And so, when we were looking at, well, how can force majeure clauses mean that you fronted the material cost, the work has already been done, and workers are literally just asking for wages back to March. And so we have heard from some suppliers to say, maybe it's time to bring back letters of credit. And in some ways, a lot of these brands have been quite short-sighted, right? Because what you've done is you've decimated your supply chain. And so even in Bangladesh, in other contexts, some of the factories are saying, as you come back to place orders, if you haven't paid your back bills, we're not going to do business with you. So there is also this sort of short-term, it's earnings season, we're going to shore up our cash for our investors, so we're not going to pay our partners. It's like, well, you can't really do business in the long run in that way. But obviously the international dynamic to this makes it quite complicated, right? And can we take any of these brands to court? Well, I think the thing for people listening is we don't have time. We already have workers that are food insecure on the streets right now. So what we need is just for them to pay up.
I'm going to go more to questions at the end, but this question, one of the questions feels really relevant to this sort of tack we're already on, asking if there are any suggestions on how to start conversations with politicians, local or otherwise, on defining sustainable rhetoric. And that also brings to mind conversations I've had with people talking about like the car industry and how we didn't used to not regulate cars the way we do now, right? And there were all of these deaths because of seatbelts and all of these other things. And there's things that, and pollution, air pollution, right? Like the first Earth Day in the 70s was a response to pollution that was happening. And the thing that changed it was regulation. So I don't know if that's something that any of you feel able to speak to, but that question feels relevant to this part of the discussion.
I think because community is so, like, it's what I lead with. My involvement politically, especially with sustainability conversations, has started at the community level. So like whether that's attending community board meetings or going to office hours for our borough president, or emailing our my politicians, or even just like, yeah, those things are ways that I get involved politically and start these conversations. Oftentimes the people I speak with are not, able to, like, once I explain the correlation between sustainability and racial justice, environmental justice, and all of the clusterfuck that we're experiencing, then it's like, aha. But initially, that those correlations are not, widely known. So I think starting with, just learning from people who draw these parallels, learning from people who really are sort of pushing sustainability literacy to the masses. Start there, and then from there inform your approach of how you're going to get involved, right where you are, because political activity is happening all around you every day.
I'm really grateful for the question because, I think for a long time there's been this naivety that we can somehow buy ourselves into a sustainable fashion future. And so the fact that we're even having this conversation about, well, wait a minute, how do I talk to government, or how do I think of this from a civic participation standpoint, is really important. I think at a very tactile level for, people that are listening in from California, as I mentioned, there's literally a bill right now where we know that, a lot of the 40,000 plus workers in LA that are making our PPP are not able to be safe themselves. They get, piece rate, something like 6 cents for a mask. And so we really do have to show that that is minimum wage. So that's something to support, because that bill is up right now, and the Garment Worker Center does some wonderful work right here at home. I think, at a federal level, we've really seen a rollback when it comes to any type of environmental protections, or be it social protections. And so what I'd tell everybody is vote. You really need to be doing that. In fact, we had some young activists on one of our calls last week just talking about rocking the youth vote and how important it is. But what Whitney said is so important about being involved really locally at a city level, because so much of this regulation, when we're thinking about the plastic ban or the New York and California Transparency Act, it's very much at a city level. I do know there's some European friends listening in, and that within the EU framework, there is more conversation of doing this and from an intra-country basis. But I do think one of the bright spots coming out of COVID is that this self-regulation, voluntary initiatives, and holding the industry accountable for itself, we know it's not working. And so I do think we're going to see more bills, more regulations on the docket.
Definitely joining forces and local collaborations are so important at this point. Pushing engaging other brands that are in the same movement to do the same, and to also include socioeconomic factors into their discussions and strategies around sustainability is huge. Again, echoing both of you at looking at local politics and the community building around that, activating our own community and pushing that out. So it's starting small and pushing out, but not overlooking, the power of your very small local community and what that can turn into and how that can inspire.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that some of the regulations that California specifically has put in place around pollution and plastic, and actually specifically cars, again, it ends up being too much of a pain in the butt for car manufacturers to make things differently for different places. So in the US at least, they end up just making things to California's standards, and then that impacts sustainability for the rest of the country. So that's, again, just a little example of how sort of doing things in this small way can have impacts that sort of spiral out and get bigger. We are going to go fully over to questions in just a minute, but before we do that, I wanted to ask each of you to talk about one specific actionable thing you are personally doing or that you are planning to do to sort of remake the industry into one that better centers people and the planet.
Just one thing? Is that what you said? Sorry, I missed it. One thing?
One thing. If you need to add another, we'll give you grace for that.
It can be a set. Okay, I think that the one would have to be like the reevaluation of our own consumption, like just reevaluation, meditation, examination. But there's so much more.
I love when you have to do just one thing, you know, because it just brings it to the forefront. So I appreciate the question. My personal commitment is to ensure that we'll keep using the Remake platform to shine a light on what's happening to the women who make our clothes globally. And I commit to all of you to give you actionable ways to support the makers of our clothes, whether direct relief or advocacy.
I'm not supporting fashion houses or companies that haven't publicly addressed, you know, the state-sanctioned terror inflicted upon Black and brown lives, and brands who are not actively looking to create internal policy changes and adjust their CSR and adjust their entire local supply chain from this perspective, you know, reflecting, you know, the centering of the safety of Black lives in their profit model. So if a brand hasn't done that, they don't get my money.
Makes sense. I want to go over to some of the questions from the audience now. This is a great one that is another conversation that comes up a lot in climate conversations that aren't necessarily around fashion, but that, since I'm also in a lot of climate spaces, I see this there too. This question is asking, the garment industry goes away tomorrow, millions will lose what income they have. What responsibility do you think brands or companies have to reinvest, reskill, and take responsibility for the evolution of this industry? And I guess I would like to add to that, how do you think that can happen if brands are to take that responsibility?
Yeah, you know, the track record for brands when it comes to responsible transitions hasn't been quite great. You know, years ago, I was a part of a responsible transitions task force in my days at BSR, when a lot of the Central America, Mexico orders were moving to China because the multi-fiber arrangement had expired. And at that point, you know, we were asking about upskilling and investment and how are you going to transit? And the truth is the industry just fled overnight, right? And we had doors locked in maquilas, back orders that we were asking for, you know, wages, and it was really a lot of cat and mouse game. And I think with COVID-19, some of this ability to be thinking of responsible transitions has really accelerated, right? We know that automation is not just coming, but it's here. And that, you know, even though fashion will always, you know, the seams and sitting at the Cutso factory will always be largely a labor-intensive industry, when it comes to robotics, that a lot of this industry is going to not rely just on people power forever. And so this is where I think the social protections, you know, the ILO has a call to action, assuring that these governments have safety nets. There's a wonderful organization in New York called Shimmy Technologies that's focused on getting women off the factory floor as some of these jobs become more about automation, to be promoted into those rather than men taking over. So I do think the industry should be taking a very hard look at what are the immediate ways that they're supporting these communities that have kept them profitable forever. And even as orders dry up, to be thinking about what are the social protections, how are they flexing their public policy platforms, how are they also thinking about putting money into some of these relief efforts, because the truth is none of us can afford the type of social unrest that'll be be least if, millions of people are out protesting, not just because of their back wages as they are right now, but because these jobs are not going to exist.
This is not a question, but I just want to, there's a note, can we create a sustainable fashion lobbying group to urge policymakers to make these issues a part of the larger conversation? I did just want to note there are a couple groups doing this already, and I would love to ask panelists if there are others that you know of, but I know here in the US, the New Fashion Institute, which is based out of Seattle, is working on that, and they have connections in DC, and they're sort of working on figuring some of that out. And I know Fashion Revolution in the UK is also going before policymakers there, but I don't know if you guys know of others that are really working on the policy side that people should pay attention to or look for ways to join up with.
For me, it would be the Garment Workers Center. California has always been very forward thinking when it comes to regulation. And to your excellent point, Whitney, that it then, sometimes moves on to becoming statewide. We're a nonprofit. And so one of the things for people to know is we're not actually allowed to lobby. And so for us, it's always has to be more in terms of, pushing those that are able to do that. But charity status in the US means that that's an activity that's not allowed.
I don't know what lobbying group the movement for Black Lives is attached to, or if it even is, but I know that they have currently a petition on their website for sustainability, and tying it to all of these justice conversations that we're having and the reality of what we're experiencing. So I know that is one action item that I took recently, was just signing that petition, and sustainability is the core of that initiative.
Sorry, go ahead, Mara.
No, I'm just the American Apparel and Footwear Association does some lobbying. No, okay.
I think of them more as an industry association, pushing sort of brand value rather than worker rights. But yes, they do exist.
There is also a question, which, this is tough in light of some of the things that you've been saying, Mara, but a question asking for advice for a small sustainable fashion brand trying to go forward and grow from here on out.
I don't mean I mean purpose. I mean really dig into that, why you're doing it. And what you're doing that is, again, of service or something different or something necessary or something that is actually going to promote and shift this industry and your role in it. Same thing, like the old dogs are like questioning the new, the new ones need to be really asking hard questions before they step in right now. And that isn't to say that we don't need a very aware and present new generation that is going to be doing things differently. I just think that don't get into this unless you're prepared to do immense amounts of work in it, and have an actual point of view and purpose for being here. And I know that doesn't sound like, here are your steps to being a young, sustainable brand. And it really depends on what it is that you're manufacturing. Like, what are you making? What are you doing? What are your fibers? Where are you making them? Let's talk about your parts. And then I think I could be of more service to helping direct that.
Yeah, I've also been asking questions about this since a few years ago, sort of what role is there for new sustainable fashion brands? And the one thing that I would add, just from the perspective of a reporter who sees a lot of these things come through my inbox, is to really look for a gap in the market, which there aren't very many right now, right?
That's the thing. Where are you filling in?
Yeah, which I would say one of the things that I feel like it's still a point that I see is the need for adaptive clothing and plus size clothing that's sustainably made. Those are two places that there actually might be room for new things, but there's so much that's already available in a lot of places in the market. So looking for places that are actually sort of underserved and communities that are actually underserved in terms of what is available to them that's sustainably made is maybe part of the equation.
I think also, Whitney, defining sustainability, because I think as we've seen more wokeness on the part of customers wanting sustainability, a lot of this has been co-opted without it meaning anything, right? And we really think of these issues from an intersectional standpoint, that no matter how many inroads you're making on the climate or material side, if you're not thinking about social justice or workers' rights, then you're not really sustainable. If you're not thinking about growth and how that in itself, a hyper growth model is not sustainable. So the truth is also, we've seen so much mushrooming of everyone is now a sustainable company. And what we hear from a lot of our communities, just confusion. Are they really sustainable? What does sustainability even mean?
And I would also add, just considering our relationship to waste and the in life of a product, if we're really talking about circularity and creating circular regenerative systems, I think, evaluating our relationship to waste as, people within the fashion industry, especially designers, like that you already have all the materials you need, they already exist. And, like maybe it could be part of, sort of new designers manifestos to commit to making the reduction of materials that end up in the landfill a core component of their business, and utilizing materials that are considered trash but can otherwise, like innovating ways to make them both artistic and functional, utilitarian. I also see the future for newer designers. I see in sort of a gap. PPE has created, I think, a whole new category of fashion at this point. And it's not just like the way we protect ourselves from airborne viruses, but it's how we protect ourselves from everyday threats to our being. And protest protection equipment, could be the future. But like I said, going back to what I said in the beginning, it's like envisioning your target customer and is that person creating sustainable change? Because if that person's creating sustainable change, then what you're creating for that person, you're already creating your own market. And I think more consumers care now about your ethos and how and your sustainability efforts. I would say arguably more than the product that you produce at this point.
Thank you all. There's more questions that we could get to, but I want to be sensitive to time. So thanks so much to the panelists for everything that you guys have shared. And thank you to the audience for all of these great questions and sort of your engagement. It's really appreciated. And I'm going to hand it back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your thoughts, your passion, your dreams. I love the imagining of the future, because I think we all need to do some really deep soul searching and some really wild, creative imagining, because the status quo and what we have and what we see as our reality is not working. It's totally broken, and it's going to require some super wild creativity. I love that Mara brought up this idea of reestablishing our relationship to material things, and kind of how the fashion industry, in particular, the fast fashion industry, preys upon women's need to buy material things to fill a void. We have a campaign that started today. You're looking at the little icon on the screen right now, which is 90 days of hashtag no new clothes. And the idea of it, to steal Mara's words from this conversation, is to reevaluate, meditate on, and examine our consumption. She said it beautifully for us. And we're not calling for an end to consumption, because we love fashion. That's why we're here. We're always going to support new artists. We're always going to support sustainable brands. We always want to support the women that are making our clothes. But the reality is that we have gotten into a place where our consumption is kind of blind, and it's not thoughtful. And sometimes it just takes a pause and a reset and a meditation on that to kind of dig deeper and to understand where it's coming from, so that when we go back to that consumption, it's from a place of consciousness. It's from a thoughtful place. It's from an intentional place. And to Whitney's point, Whitney McGuire's point, it's from a place where we're researching and looking at the brands that we're consuming from, and we're asking those questions, and we're being very purposeful with our purchases. So we ask you to, follow Remake Our World on Instagram, subscribe to our newsletter so that you can get these resources and these materials to learn about how to do this, and so that you can be supported by our community, get tips and tricks from everyone, share your stories. We are all about storytelling. So thank you to these brave women on the call today who shared their stories. It inspires us, and it encourages us, and it makes us feel like there's hope, and it makes us feel like we're not alone, and it makes us want to do better. Our call next month for July will be about Made in America. And, just a quick note, the reality is that a lot of people, misconstrue Made in America with automatically being ethical and automatically being sustainable. And the reality is that that is very far from the truth for most of the product that is made here in America, especially here in Los Angeles, where I am, where the garment maker population is largely concentrated in the US, with somewhere between 45,000 and 60,000 predominantly women and minorities who make our clothes. So we're going to be shining a light on that for our July call. So we invite you to join us. Please stay active, understand how incredibly powerful your voice is, to call your local politicians, to tell your family and friends what your values are, to sign petitions, to donate money, to support the right brands. It does create change. And we've seen that with our Pay Up campaign. And we have the opportunity to create much, much, much bigger change, and to create the kind of world that we want to see, and to say that we will not accept things as they are.